Welcome back to another FCP Hero Buyer's Guide. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the BMW G2X platform, including the 3 Series, the 4 Series, the Z4, and its cousin, the G42 2 Series. So what is G2X? G2X is all the chassis between G20, like this 3 Series behind me, and the G29 Z4. Back in the day, something like an E36 or an E46 meant everything from the 2-door, the 4-door, maybe even a hatchback, or something like a Z3. These days, BMW has different chassis codes for every single model, and that's why we're including all of these series into one video, because they're pretty much all the same car underneath. If you don't believe me, take a quick look at the front aluminum strut towers, engines, transmissions, dashes, clusters, iDrive knob, you name it. These are pretty much all the same car, they're just rebodied for different markets. Now internally, BMW also has an internal nomenclature for all of these cars, even including some of the SUVs. It's called CLAR or CLAR, which stands for Cluster Architecture, and that is a modular vehicle platform similar to VW's MQB or Volvo's SPA platforms. Now, this started with the G12 7 Series and has been used all the way to 2025 to develop a whole host of different vehicles for different markets, but it's the reason that you'll see similar shock towers, transmissions, engines, dashes, clusters, iDrives in all of these cars, all the way from a 2 Series to an X7. It's a really smart way to build a car, and fortunately for us enthusiasts, it means we can retrofit a lot of components between these cars and make these our own. Under the G2X umbrella, we're really not straying too far from our roots here. All of these cars are 3 Series based. Starting off with the 2 Series, we have the G42 Coupe, which includes the 230i and M240i. Now G42 isn't G2X, but it shares the same parts bin, so we've included it in this video. After that, we have the G20 330i and M340i sedan, and then followed by the G22 and G23 Coupe and Convertible 4 Series, which includes the 430i and the M440i. Now, there's a little asterisk with the 4 Series Coupe because there's also the G26 M440i Grand Coupe, which is a sedan version of the Coupe. I know, a 4-door version of a 2-door version of a 4-door car. Lots of parts bin sharing. Then at the end, we have a G29 Z4, which was available as a 30i model and an M40i model. BMW has split up all the chassis into different series, so you only end up with 2 variants of the 3 Series, 2 variants of the 4 Series with the Grand Coupe, and 2 variants of the 2 Series. Now the badges are a far cry from the way it used to be, explaining the actual engine displacement on the trunk lid, but there's still a method to the madness, and I'm going to walk you through it. Starting with the 2 Series, this is BMW's fun, sporty, and compact 2-door coupe. This car is probably one of the most pure forms of BMW in their current model lineup, and its roots come all the way from the 1 Series that was created in the mid-2000s. This, again, like I said, is one of BMW's purest driving cars, and this chassis in particular isn't actually shared with the 228i sold as a 1 Series in the rest of the world. That car is actually a front-wheel drive based Mini Cooper with a BMW body. Now, if you want a sporty sedan that can do everything, you're going to be looking at the 7th generation of the 3 Series, which is the G20. The G20 3 Series is the successor to the F30 3 Series. The G20 marks its roots all the way back into the 70s with the first 3 Series, and like I said, has been the 7th generation with constant refinement. Its competitors like the Audi A4 and the Lexus IS have always stood as good options, but the 3 Series continues to have a certain spunk that I think gives it a lot of character. Now, if you want a sporty coupe like the 2 Series, but you want a little bit more room and luxury, that's where the 4 Series comes in. As I said, BMW has spread out their body styles and chassis into different series, so now the 4 Series is offered with 3 different body styles. There's a coupe, which is the G22 4 Series, a convertible, which is the G23 4 Series, and a Grand Coupe, which is a 4-door version of a similar body style, the G26 4 Series Grand Coupe. Now you might be wondering, where does the Z4 fit into all of this? Well, it actually did a similar thing to the 3 Series where it went up market, so they increased the model designation from 3, like a Z3, to 4, and made it a more luxurious and expensive car. Now the Z4 is an interesting one amongst G2X because Z in German represents Zukunft or future, and BMW oftentimes uses the Z cars and the 7 Series to show off its future tech and styling. This Z4 behind me, the body style actually debuted in 2018 for the 2019 model year, and it's what all the rest of these cars have followed along with for their styling, both interior and on the exterior. So with the first digit out of the way, let's get into engines and what 30i and M40i actually mean. Although the badge doesn't have specific displacement anymore, BMW did make it easy on us this time around, with just 30i and M40i being the two trims available for all of these cars. There is a 30e variant for the G20 Series, but that's just a 330 with electric assist. The 30 means a B48 4-cylinder, which is the 2-liter base engine option, producing 255 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. This is one of BMW's great engines. It's a fantastic 4-cylinder, it's really stout, and like its 6-cylinder big brother, they've been known to be quite reliable. Now the M40i variant is where you get BMW's holy grail 3-liter straight 6, the B58. While it comes at a price premium, the B58 is known to be one of BMW's best engines they've ever made, and with a base horsepower of 382 horsepower and 364 pound-feet of torque, the updated B58 that's offered in all of these G2X cars is a fantastic engine. People have pushed the B58 for years, and it's a wonderful performance platform, as well as a fairly reliable daily drivable engine. Now, if you're into performance tuning and you want to modify these cars and get more power out of them, you might want to get a pre-June of 2020 car. Why so? Well, because BMW figured out what people were doing, and post-June of 2020 cars are a bit harder to crack and code than pre-June of 2020. You can go with something like a Dynantronics tuner that we carry here at FC Bureau. This is an inline tuner that will basically trick the engine parameters into making more power. Now, regardless of what your thoughts are on that, it does allow you to modify vehicles without breaking a factory warranty, and they're generally very conservative and safe. The Dynan products typically are some of the best with reliability and longevity. If you want to learn more about the details of these engines, maintenance intervals, and how they're engineered, you can check out our engine guides, also available on the FC Bureau Media channel. So we've covered the first digit, which is the model designation, and the second and third digit, which is your engine. Now there's one more badge you might find on the trunk lid, and that's xDrive. With the exception of the Z4, all of these cars are available with or without xDrive, and that's BMW's all-wheel drive system. Now the great thing about xDrive is that unlike a front-wheel drive based system like you might find in a Golf R or the base 228i 2 Series that's similar to the Mini Cooper, these systems are all rear-wheel drive based, and then they have a transfer case bolted to the end of the transmission which sends power back to the front. This means that the all-wheel drive system doesn't spoil the driving dynamics, and even if you love driving, this four-wheel drive system will just add a little bit of security rather than taking away the fun of driving a BMW. Now let's talk the elephant in the room, something that affects all of these cars in a big way, which is the M Sports package. Now, similar to prior generations of BMW, the M Sport package does change the appearance of the outside of the car. So you're going to get more aggressive front bumpers, rear bumpers, and side skirts. Now, it's also going to affect the interior. You're going to get bolstered seats, which are also available in the Sportline package. You're going to get a more aggressive steering wheel with paddles, and oftentimes it'll be associated with other packages such as the live cockpit, which is the digital dash, and other aggressive things that make the car more driver-oriented from an appearance or a UX standpoint. Now, talking nitty-gritty, this generation of BMWs has a lot of fundamental changes under the skin with the M Sport package, and that's what sets this generation apart from its predecessors. The M Sport package also will include stiffer bushings in the suspension, both front and rear, in multiple suspension arms. It'll include different springs and dampers to lower the car and give it a stiffer ride. It'll also include larger brakes over the base car, and there's even some additional cooling to help the car stay cool on track, as well as a different exhaust note. Now, it's important to keep an eye out for if a car has an M Sport package or not, because there's certain things that are really difficult to retrofit. For example, if the car has an M variable rear differential, that communicates with the car's stability control, and you're really going to want to make sure that the car comes with that differential from the factory if you want it. It's very difficult to retrofit, unlike things like the seats, which you can swap in and out pretty easily, or you can get the M Sport seats in the Sports package, which is a slightly in-between package that's a little bit less expensive than the M Sport package, but still comes with some of the goodies. Now, it's really important to mention that unlike prior generations, M and 40i, M as in M Sport package, aren't separable at all. So if you're getting a car with a B58, it's coming with the M Sport package, whether you like it or not, hence M40i and 30i being the two trims that the cars are sold in. This is a pretty cool move by BMW, and it makes sure that it's not possible to order the car with the big horsepower without the suspension, handling, and seats to back it up. So as we've said, a lot of the options in standard equipment apply to all of these different models. Now we're going to get into the different options and the nuances of each package, so that way you know what to look out for when you're trying to find your own G2X. So the first thing we're going to talk about is lighting, and boy do I wish I would have known more about the intricacies of the lighting packages on these cars when I bought my own G20, which is that black one sitting behind me. For example, all of us know BMW for having the halo headlights or the hexagon rings. Now, in all of their marketing material, and even in the iDrive systems, BMW shows those hexagon rings lit up. But if you get a car with base headlights, even if it's base with extended features like cornering lights, it will not have the signature hexagon or rings around the low beam. Instead, it'll have something a little bit less like this lower accent here, and actually in Europe there's even a smaller accent, which is just a little tiny LED underneath the headlight. This is kind of a bummer because the rings look absolutely fantastic on all of these cars, and as you can see on the 4 Series next to me, those rings are present because it has the laser light package. Now, BMW hid this package between different models, whether it was in the executive package on the 3 Series or a standalone option like on the 4 Series. Make sure that you keep an eye out for this, because if you want that look, you're going to have to spring for the extra packages that light was included in. Another interesting thing to point out about G2X lights is that oftentimes, if you didn't get that top tier lighting option, only the outer bulbs are actually populated with anything. The inners are just dummy lamps with only a lens and no light element. That's why when I hit the unlock button, only the outers turn on and not the inners. They still work great as lights. The outers function as a high beam and a low beam. It's just not as cool looking and certainly less light output than the optional laser lights, or like the facelifted version, which has quad headlights. Shadow line lights really change the look of the car. Now, if you're not familiar with shadow line is blacking out trim. So if it's a shadow line car, it typically will have blacked out window trim, blacked out grills, etc. On G-Series cars and at the tail end of the F-Series cars, BMW started to implement shadow line into the lighting. So whether the housing was blacked out like this facelifted car here, or various parts of the headlight were blacked out like the edges of the lamp, shadow line can actually make a pretty big difference on how the front end of the car looks. I personally think this G20, which is a forum member from South Korea, he has nailed it with shadow line lights that are also laser and have those hexagon DRLs. So just keep a lookout for this. Shadow line lights are actually pretty rare and they're very expensive to retrofit. Now, the 30i badge and the M40i badge do separate the two different engines, but they also separate quite a bit of standard equipment. Similar to how a 335i used to be more upmarket than a 320i and come with more standard equipment, it's the same story here. An M40i comes standard with the M Sport package, brakes, and appearance package, as well as additional cooling, and a lot of M40i cars in this lineup get different standard safety and driver assistance equipment that the 30i cars have as optional equipment. It's important to look out for these different options, especially when you're searching for a B48 powered 30i car, because the options can vary wildly and you may or may not have what you need for daily driving based on what was selected by the dealership or the original purchaser. Now, I touched on brakes in the M Sport package, but there's a lot more to it with BMW G2X than there was with any prior generation of BMW. So let's take a minute to show you everything you need to know about the brake packages on these cars. Starting with 30i, the base cars receive a 330mm rotor in the front and a 330mm rotor in the rear, both being single piston floating calipers. this is going to be your most affordable brake option and your cheapest to service. One step above that, we have the brakes included with the M Sport package, which are 348 millimeters in the front with a 4-piston fixed caliper, meaning it's physically bolted to the hub instead of sliding on pins, and a similar single-piston floating caliper at the rear, but with a 345 millimeter disc instead. This kit also adds extra width to the rotors. It's 36 millimeters wide at the front, which should really help with managing heat on something like a track day. Now, a little nuance with the M Sport package brakes is that in March of 2022, there was actually a refresh for the pad shape. So cars built after March of 2022 do not have the same pad shape for their M Sport brakes as M Sport brakes produced before March of 2022. Now, going one step larger than M Sport brakes is going to be the track handling package, or the Motorsport engineered brakes, which are 374 millimeters at the front, again with a 4-piston caliper, and 345 at the rear. Now, what's really important to mention here is that the calipers are not the same as what's in the M Sport package. They may look visually similar, but they're actually quite a bit larger, and they have a different radius than the Motorsport engineered track handling package or M Performance brake packages. You might have caught that last one at the end. The M Performance brake package is yet another brake package which could be optioned at the dealership, and that's going to be the same size as the Motorsport engineered and track handling package brakes with 374 and 345 respectively, but the rotors will be dimpled and slotted. The M Performance brakes are the only option with dimpled and slotted rotors, and we actually carry the Zimmermann OE replacement for those M Performance brakes should you want to cosmetically upgrade your track handling package or Motorsport engineering package brakes to have dimples and slots. You can use the rotors from the M Performance package. Something to keep in mind with all these brake packages is it might be fun to aspire to having the biggest brakes of your friend group, but in reality, the larger the brakes, the more expensive they become to service. It seems like the community has figured out that the 330 millimeter brake package on the base cars, coupled with a set of good pads, can actually handle some pretty abusive track driving. So seems like that's a pretty reasonable option, and the higher options are mainly a cosmetic modification. Not to say that they don't perform well at the limit. We have to be kind of quick with this one because we borrowed these cars from BMW of Bridgeport. Thank you so much to them. And they actually just sold this one to a very lucky person. So this is a great example of a LCI 2 BMW G20. So basically there's been 2 facelifts. LCI means life cycle impulse. This is a facelift 2. So it has the exterior facelift where it got different bumpers and a different dash. It also received iDrive 8 with the curved dash. So everything is now in the screen, like heated seats and stuff like that. A lot of people prefer the pre-LCI for tactile buttons, but there's some who really enjoy the big screen. Super high res, CarPlay looks great on it. This car also features the B58N, which is the TU2 of the B58, so the second technical update. Some crazy things about it. Features eVanos, which is electronically controlled Vanos rather than oil-controlled Vanos. It has twin injection for direct injection and port injection, which is totally crazy. I'm sure these will make a ton of power. It also has smart coils, which are going to be very expensive to replace, I'm sure. And they've moved a few things up into the top of the engine bay to make it more serviceable, such as the auxiliary water pump. It also has switchable rocker arms, so it can have less compression on deceleration to store more energy in its mild hybrid system, which this car now is only offered as a mild hybrid 48 volt system with the B58. There is no longer an M340i with only a gasoline engine. It is now a hybrid. With that, the LCI improvements have also deleted the standard shifter. It is now a toggle on the center iDrive stack. And as I said, the wraparound screen, which now features iDrive 8.5, is a little bit cleaned up from the iDrive 8 facelift, which happened in 2022. People complained about things being harder to find than they should have been, so BMW updated it, cleaned it up, and now we have iDrive 8.5. These cars also have a few differences with their headlights and their lighting. These, as I said before, now have quad headlights, just like the laser light did previously, and the headlight shape for the DRL now comes up, and there's no longer that base lighting option with only the lower light signatures like mine has. It has the full ring. It just comes up instead of going down. So let's talk suspension options. You basically have three different suspension options. There's base, which changed a little bit depending on which series it was, such as in the 4 Series where it was 10 millimeters lower as the base car. Then you have M Sport, which is going to be stiffer, lower, and a little bit flatter in corners than the base suspension. Then on top of that, you're going to have M Adaptive suspension. This is going to allow you to choose between comfort damping, standard, or sport damping. Now, personally, I think that they go a little bit overboard with the sport damping typically, and sometimes even a little bit too soft with comfort damping. Now, it should be noted that all of these cars featured a brand new suspension technology, or at least a new approach for the dampers, whether it's a base car or an M Sport car. This is called lift-related dampers, and a lot of manufacturers do this, but typically in the very final part of the stroke of the dampers and not like they've done here. What BMW did is applying basically a 2-stage damper to the middle range of the suspension motion, so you get better rebound and compression damping over different types of bumps. So your suspension can remain nice and soft and compliant for normal driving, and then when you hit a really big bump or you're bottoming out on something, it can firm up the suspension to keep the wheels from jarring the car. What they do is they have an inner tube on the damper that when compressed below 17 or 20 millimeters, depending on the model and the application, it will basically activate a second valve at the bottom of the shock and change the compression or rebound damping accordingly. It's really cool. Like I said, most manufacturers use this in the very end of the travel of the shock. BMW uses this past just about an inch of travel. This is important to keep in mind if you're like me and you're an idiot and you lower your car, because when you have a lowered car, it might ride within that second stage and the ride will become very, very firm. So if you want to lower your car, it might be good to check out a set of coilovers, maybe save up for that extra adjustability rather than maxing out that second stage of the damper travel. BMW made a point to make certain parts of the G2X chassis incredibly stiff, much more so than their predecessors, so that the suspension could be softer and give a more controlled ride. This is definitely evident when you drive this. The pet name for this project internally was Effortless Speed. And BMW wanted to make the 3 Series, 2 Series, and 4 Series drive effortlessly and without a lot of NVH. This brings me on to steering, and steering feel is something that's been a big complaint for this series of BMWs. While the variable rack that's included in the M340i is a nice upgrade, it is actually the same rack, the same internally belt-driven electric power steering rack that was featured in the F30. You can tell because the motor on the rack is actually in line with the rack itself. The 4-cylinder cars like the 30i got the new dual pinion electric power steering rack, which improves feel and control. You can see that this is a dual pinion rack because the motor will be offset at an angle relative to the rack itself. This is supposed to improve feel. If all of this just sounds like gibberish to you and you're not interested in those details, all you need to know is that all of these cars use electric power steering, which means there's no power steering fluid, which is fantastic because all of us, if you're into BMWs, are probably familiar with leaking power steering lines. I want to talk about one thing that changes the steering feel in these cars a ton across all of G2X. If you've seen our suspension video, you already know what I'm talking about. The front wishbones on these cars are basically where BMW is changing the steering feel. So on an M Sport car, they stiffen that bushing and it translates more of the front and back wheel motion into the tie rod and into the steering. But you can upgrade the steering feel even further by putting in something like a monoball. Dine-In actually sells a monoball that uses an OE style bushing. This is great because it has a boot on it and it prevents salt and road debris from hurting the bushing. All right, so I'm gonna try to simplify this as best as I can. BMW made this very confusing, and I've heard horror stories of even dealerships not informing people of how this works. So bottom line, there are 3 different gauge clusters that were equipped globally and 2 that we got in the United States. Depending on what gauge cluster you got, you could either have Android Auto or not. Basically, there is the base instrument cluster, which would have come with an 8.8-inch infotainment display, which is the smaller display. And then there's this one, which is Live Cockpit Professional, that's the option, and it comes with the 10.25-inch center information display. Now, here's where they'll get you. If you have a base display, you are not eligible to get the connected driving package. You are not going to have Android Auto, and you may have to get the car coded in order to have that. Now, if you want CarPlay and you're an iPhone user, it doesn't matter what gauges or center screen you have. 6CP is the option code for CarPlay preparation, and any car can have it. All in all, if you want CarPlay, just make sure it has 6CP as an option code, and if you want Android Auto, make sure that it has the connected driving package. Now, onto the topic of connectivity, these cars did not come standard with remote start connectivity via the BMW app. If you want that, that's also a part of the connected driving package. Now, that's not to say they don't all have access to remote start. They just have to have option 1CR, which is remote start, and then you'll triple click the lock button with the key, and you'll be able to remote start your car. Now, here's the bummer, and I know this is gonna infuriate a lot of people. We're gonna mention the S word, subscriptions. These cars will run out of any service that was included from the factory that's remote, like remote start, remote checking on the car, like remote 360 view for parking assistant, and CarPlay after 4 years. People who have purchased 2019 cars have had to pay for the subscription service to be reactivated for the remote services and, in some cases, Android Auto. In 2022, BMW introduced the big curved screen along with iDrive 8. Now, if you're into big screens and you want your CarPlay to be as large as possible, this is probably the way to go. However, there was a catch. iDrive 8 had quite a few dizzying grid menus and also removed a lot of the fixed climate positions into the climate menu. So if you want to turn on your heated seats, you have to go into a climate menu. Thankfully, they fixed a bit of this with iDrive 8.5. In a car that has iDrive 8.5, the home menu will have just the map with a couple tiles for other bits of information. In a car with iDrive 8, you'll have these separate tiles as the home screen, like your radio, your telephone connectivity, and your map. So personally, if you're gonna get a big screen, you're probably gonna want to spring for iDrive 8.5. Now, while you can spec the interior of these cars to your heart's content, you can add things like wireless charging, a heads-up display, there are a few options that I would probably skip personally. The wireless charging, for one, is actually really slow on all of these cars, which is kind of a bummer, and it's known to basically just overheat people's phones. Adaptive Cruise and many of the driver assistance packages that feature a low level of autonomous driving are also pretty rare because they're kind of known to not be as refined as the 5 and 7 series variants of the same systems. However, if you want something like 360 camera view, you will have to get Parking Assistant, which is the only package that allows you to get that option. And if you have that plus Connected Drive, you can actually 360 view from your phone, which is really cool. Speaking of interior options, something like the Harman Kardon sound system might sound really appealing if you're an audiophile, but unlike BMWs of past, BMW isn't really shipping these cars with bad audio systems anymore. The factory hi-fi, which is usually 10 speakers depending on the model, is actually really good. And final note on the interior, if you want those sweet M Sport seats, but you don't want to shell out to get the crazy suspension and the different bumpers, there's always Sportline, which I mentioned before, which gives you those nice seats without all of the extra stuff. If you're not familiar with BMW's leather options, across the G2X range, the base is Sensatec, which is a vegan leather, or a leatherette, as people call it, and it's basically a vinyl that looks like leather and occasionally feels like leather. Now, the earlier cars had an issue with this leatherette basically flaking apart. I've seen it on my car. The steering wheel flakes apart. The armrest is basically destroyed. And in 2022, they improved the Sensatec leather to be a little bit softer, a little bit more robust. And if you don't want to deal with any of that, you can upgrade to the Vernasca leather, which is a real leather and quite a bit more hard-wearing and soft than the Sensatec leather. If you want to improve your interior even more, you can buy parts like the M Performance upgrades, which actually, again, aren't just aesthetic. They also can include things like Alcantara knee bolsters, which have an extra amount of foam padding in them in order to keep your knees from getting bruised on the center console, like mine do every morning on the way to work. Check them out on fcpro.com. So with that, let's move on to some things to look out for and maintenance items across all of the G2X range. Now, we've gone into some pretty significant depth on these engines in our engine guides, but some key things to look out for across all of G2X, no matter what the engine is, are the following. Firstly, they have twin cooling circuits, and they use a new type of coolant. So you have the same coolant for both your low temp and your high temp circuit for the main engine and the intercooler, but it's no longer blue. It's called HT12, and it uses something called Frostox, which is a corrosion inhibitor that forms a layer of silicate over the aluminum gasket and plastic parts in the cooling system. Now, issues that plague both the B58 and the B48 TU include the oil filter housing, which is plastic, the heat management module, or the new thermostat, which is plastic, fuel tank breather valves, which tend to fail and are plastic, and basically just the general plasticky construction of the outside of these engines, like the valve covers, which contain the PCV system, which is integrated and you can't replace on its own. So be prepared to service things like the valve cover, oil filter housing, and heat management module all around 60 or 70,000 miles, and be aware of the different recalls that happened, such as the balance shaft on the B48, the tie rods on the 3 Series, and various airbag recalls and rocker arm recalls. All of these cars on the G chassis were only sold with an automatic, except for the Z4. That lovely little thing got a 6-speed manual with the Han Shelter package, which unfortunately requires a whole bunch of extra stuff like black optics and stuff like that, but it is available with the 6-speed manual. Save the manuals. I will say, as someone who owns this car and also owns several other M cars, the 8 HP is so good in this chassis that if you're fearing that you're not going to like the engagement of the car because it won't have a manual, go out and drive one. It's such a good transmission. I don't think people actually dislike automatics. They generally just dislike bad automatics, and this is not one of them. If you want a sporty coupe, a do-it-all sedan, a coupe that is trying to be a do-it-all sedan, or a convertible, G2X has you covered. Let me know what your favorite G2X car is in the comments and your favorite color and options. I personally chose a blend of practicality and performance. I think many will agree with me. The 330i behind me has basically every connectivity package you could ask for. Sportline, so I get those comfy and cool looking sport seats. All-wheel drive, but a B48 for that great fuel economy with punchy, lightweight performance. Now, I think if I had to do it over again, I'd probably get a Han Shelter package, 6-speed manual G29 Z4, but pretty sure that still costs a kidney, so maybe that'll be a future Alex problem. At FC Bureau, we have an entire team dedicated to improving our catalog for European cars, including all of these G2X cars. So if you want to know what it takes to maintain, fix, or modify these cars, head on over to fcbureau.com. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.